Hello, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. I'm Joe Gould. I'm here with Adam Winters, and we're going to look at one of the all-time classic cartoon series that most people have only seen a couple of episodes of, I would say. The Superman Fleischer cartoons. How do you pronounce it, Adam?
I had heard it as Fleischer.
Okay, I think we are aligned then. So this was a set of 17 animated cartoon/short films. They were released in Technicolor, and it was distributed by Paramount Pictures. And more technically, we should say the first 8 episodes were produced by Fleischer Studios, and then first 9, and then the remaining 8 produced by Famous Studios.
Well, I think it probably was the same studio, just different leadership and name, right?
Yeah, I think from what I understand, and I wasn't aware of this until I was getting ready for this episode, they basically got new ownership. I think the talent pool for the actual cartoons stayed the same. And they're all between, roughly 7 to 9 minutes long. So they're standard 1940s cartoon length.
Some of these shorts eat up a lot of time on the intro sequence. It can be really long.
Yeah, up to 2 minutes of it was the intro. You add the credits in, it's definitely over 2 minutes. And overall, they're really good. I have to say that. And I think the animation style is classic. It definitely, and at least partially, inspired Batman the Animated Series and the Superman cartoon that followed.
Yeah, that's a fact.
Yeah. You're much more of an expert on those. The dog does not like Labradoodles.
Yeah, no one does. But Bruce Timm and his crew, they actually had to rein it back when they did a Superman cartoon because they didn't want to try to do a one-to-one recreation of the Fleischer look. So they tried to modernize that a little bit.
Okay.
It's impressive how quickly they churned these things out between 1941 and maybe 1943.
So I thought I saw somewhere that Fleischer had like up to 800 employees.
Oh, wow.
So if that is true, I would think that they were working on these concurrently. Let me see if I can see that real quick. Yeah, they had in 1939 they had 800 employees.
That's a bunch. Yeah, I don't know much about some of the art talent at the studio. They got famous probably for Popeye before they did Superman.
Yeah, so they were famous for Popeye. A lot of their stuff was much less realistic, more cartoony, and they actually really didn't want to do the show. I guess they doubted their ability, and their theory to get out of it was to tell Paramount that it was going to cost $100,000 an episode.
Oh, they're cool with that.
Yeah, which would be about $1.6 million today for a 7-minute cartoon. So Paramount, they didn't want to hear that. So they renegotiated, and ultimately, I think the first episode it said was about $50,000 budget, and the rest of them for about 30. I can only imagine what they could have done with 100. But
They didn't have to eat up the time on that intro sequence, most likely.
Yeah, and then I guess I'm not entirely sure what this looks like in practice, but they used rotoscoping to help themselves with the realistic animation, which they were not accustomed to drawing. So
Yeah.
I guess in that you're tracing animation drawings from live action footage. So I guess you record someone and then you take the film and you trace, maybe?
Yeah, I expect they had their own live action cast. It'd be hard to imagine getting a lot of stock footage for something like this, which really hadn't been put on screen before. I mean, Superman was, 3 years old when the first one of these shorts came out in 41? Now, that says quite a lot of how big of a splash Superman was, that 3 years later, a major movie studio is willing to spend way more money on a theatrical short that had never been spent just to get this thing made and attach it to their movies.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And all these cartoons are now in the public domain. You probably saw them growing up in the dollar bin at the Dollar General.
But I'm at least thankful that even though it's been public domain for a long time, there have been several attempts to remaster the originals to give a very good-looking quality, which I think I watched mine on Vudu, which got upscaled a while back soon after they came out with a new Blu-ray, and looks really good. The quality, I think. I don't know how much of that is how much they were doing that with AI or whatever, but yeah, it looks fine.
Yeah, and actually, I think that release got criticized. I think that release actually got criticized because they did an upscale, and I think since then they've done a true 4K version based off the original 35 millimeter film, which I owned, but I didn't open. I just went ahead and watched the Vudu. And it was really good. I think there was only one scene or one of the episodes that had you could tell they zoomed in and it got kind of blurry. I think it was the King Kong episode.
Terror on the Midway.
Yeah, I believe it was that. It was like Lois's face, and it was like the monkey, the
They
gorilla,
did a
whatever.
lot of close-ups in that particular short.
Yeah, and I'm not really sure why, because
They
they
went
really do look
horror
blurry. I
with
assume they
that.
looked atrocious back in the day.
It's part of the effect. They want to sell that whole
Yeah.
thing.
Well, it's like they just didn't draw a big enough head.
It's
But
impressive again. So little of what you think of Superman existed in 1941. I don't think Lex Luthor was a thing. The whole idea of a supervillain rogues gallery, even probably Ma and Pa Kent didn't exist. And yet you watch these shorts and you feel like that's that's what Superman has always been. Even though, I mean, he wasn't even flying by the time they started making these. I think the studio may have invented his flight ability just to make it more convenient on their animators.
yeah, so yeah, based off this show, they introduced flying into the comics. I think and you can tell there's a lot of jumping leaps and bounds, a la Hulk in this cartoon, and they never completely get away from that. And it does look silly in some places. And my understanding is the animators felt so as well. And they asked DC Comics or whoever they were called at the time if they could have permission to have Superman fly, and they said sure. I think that was a win-win for all involved.
And when you think of Superman, he has a ridiculous amount of powers, but in my opinion, there are two that are preeminent. And number one is the whole idea of Man of Steel, bullets bouncing off the chest, invulnerability, durability, however you want to call it. And the other one is you'll believe a man can fly. And we have this series to thank for the whole idea of Superman flying just as a convenience.
Yeah, yeah, and I think he had X-ray vision as well. Is that right, or is it heat vision, or is it undeclared vision? There was a couple of intros that talked about it. I think there was a couple of episodes that incorporated it.
I'm trying to remember the short that zooms in on his face when he uses one of those and he's sort of in midair. And I can't remember which episode it is where he uses his eye vision powers.
Yeah, but that's basically it. There's no other powers here. He's either got X-ray or heat vision. He doesn't have the other one. And you can even tell his strength is very convenient for the scene.
It's momentum based in a large sense, and I like that too.
There was an episode, I believe, maybe it's Secret Agent, the final episode, where some saboteurs are trying to take down a big jet, and he's able to catch the jet right before it hits the ground and keep it from hitting the ground. I believe it's the very same episode. He has to punch a door 4 times to get it open.
Well, it's not the Secret Agent episode. It is one with, I think it's Japatours, isn't it? Where they steal the giant airplane.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And it's a massive propeller airplane. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
It's like an aircraft carrier, but in the sky. Other little planes take off from on top of that.
Yeah. Well, since you've opened Pandora's box on that, we can go ahead and say the first 9 episodes, which you can almost call season 1, because they are thematically just entirely different than the ones released by Famous Studios, with the exception of the Mummy one, I believe. But they were all more of science fiction-y kind of stuff. You might have had an ethnic issue once or twice kind of thrown in, I suppose. But really, it was just you have your scientist of the week or a earthquake or a whatever you want to call it. But then when you get to the Famous Studios, which they started coming out September 18th of 42, and they came out until July of the following year. Not all of them, but most of them have to do with wartime propaganda against the Nazis. And when we say the Nazis, we really mean, aside from a brief cameo from Adolf Hitler himself, Japan. They really don't like Japan.
That's understandable.
It is, but it is interesting that they didn't really focus much on the Germans.
Well, yeah, the underground world, which you probably have more thoughts on that with Molman. That one is a clear Nazi German in charge of that. But yeah, I guess that was just how they wanted to hit the American patriotic note, because most Americans were more interested probably in getting revenge on Japan than they would have been liberating Europe. I'm kind of guessing there, but just kind of putting yourself into those shoes. I'm just thinking the Pacific campaign probably held a little bit more of a gung-ho than the European one did.
Yeah, so most of the stuff in here is your standard patriotic stuff you would see in Captain America. It's just really focused on Japan instead of the Nazis in general. There was a couple episodes where I think he probably does get into a little awkward territory. So on the 11th hour, It's a really different kind of episode. It is Clark Kent is hanging out in Japan, and every night at 11 o'clock, he becomes a active participant in the war on behalf of America. He's taking out Japanese ships for the most part.
Well, there's a lot of questions on the setup because Clark Kent and Lois Lane are both foreign correspondents and they're granted permission to be there, but they're supervised by Japanese and they have limited privileges. Like if the guards don't like the words that are being said, they're going to bust in and execute one of them.
Yes, the setup's weird, but the whole premise of the episode is kind of awkward because you never think of Superman as being a member of the United States military.
And it begs the question, if you're going to put Superman in an active war, why doesn't he just win the war? Even if he's less powered than he might be today.
Yeah, so that one's weird. And then Jungle Drums.
Yeah,
You have German. I think they actually do use the Germans for this one.
Yeah.
And this is where I think you have the cameo of Hitler at the end, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
And
Submarine
you have
mission.
Germans in off-brand KKK outfits, like leading African tribes.
I looked at it more as like a totem outfit, but they went with a curious choice of a white robe and hood with horns. They have horns. You know, do a little something different. I don't know.
I don't know who the audience is for this. It's just, that was an awkward setup. I could have probably done without that episode. I don't think the episode was very good either.
It begs the question of how these Germans were able to set up a base inside a tribal temple and win the group over to do their bidding. Now, Japatour has some of my favorite visual elements in all the Superman cartoon. Just that shot near the beginning when Superman is hiding on the scaffolding from a spotlight. And it's very Batman-esque, what you would have seen later, just moving from one place to another in between the shadows. I really do like that.
No, and I think growing up, you would see these cartoons on just regular television, mixed in with the other cartoons. And the first episode, Superman, which I thought it really was called The Mad Scientist in the show, so I'm not sure why it's officially Superman.
Yeah.
That one's always seen, and that's a classic.
Yeah.
Everything about the episode's cool. And then you had Japatours. That's the other one that was always on.
Well, I was going to say Mechanical Monsters. That may be the second most famous one.
Well, I would say third, but you know, second, third.
They made a toy set based on Mechanical Monsters. I remember that.
I think for the most part, if you were growing up in the 90s like us, you're really seeing a handful of these unless you got like the dollar bin DVD with 3 or 4 episodes.
They were popular on VHS in the 1990s, but they were always shoved on there with other cartoons. You know, maybe Popeye, maybe Mighty Mouse or something like that. I have yet to get a good full release of all the classic Mighty Mouse stuff. I'm still waiting on a legitimate Mighty Mouse compilation.
Who made Mighty Mouse? I don't even know.
Terry Toons. I think it's Terry Toons.
I always enjoyed watching that as a kid, but I had never owned a single episode.
Again, it was hard to find a whole lot of original episodes. They had the Ralph Bakshi show in the 80s, which pretty wild. Had a source of some controversy, but is enjoyable.
So one other thing, just from a technical standpoint, that I could not figure out was everything I read says that Bud Collyer, who was the voice of Superman on the radio show, so my understanding is it appears that Bud did not finish the show.
I kind of heard that in the last couple episodes. I wasn't sure.
I could not find anything that said who replaced him and in what episode. But even Wikipedia credits him for the final episodes.
Yeah, I did wonder about that. In most of the episodes, very few people speak at any lengths. And you probably have a little more dialogue in the last few episodes, like Secret Agent, Underground World, maybe Jungle Drums, even though it's mostly the bad guys talking. Bud Collyer's pretty good. You know, he doesn't have near as much to do as he did on the radio program, but he really made a point to change his vocal inflection when Clark Kent decided to be Superman.
This looks like a job for Superman.
Superman. And yet, once he's Superman, he doesn't talk much when he's apprehending villains or whatever. I don't know how much of that was just they didn't want to pay Bud to do a whole lot more dialogue or what. But
I don't know. Do you think that inflection change that he did inspired Kevin Conroy?
I've never heard any interview where Conroy went with that specifically. It might have been some encouragement from the vocal direction, Andrea Romano and stuff like that. But I don't I don't have any evidence.
Okay, because unlike George Reeves, he does have a Clark Kent voice and a slightly different Superman voice,
Right.
which it makes sense. Oh, since speaking of Clark Kent and Superman, I like to call this the squinty version of him. He has no pupils half
Yeah, I
the time.
like that. I like that squinty
It,
Superman.
but then occasionally he does have pupils. It's like whoa, 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 whoa.
It's creepy when you get a zoom in shot of Superman's eyes. And I guess part of that is just the artistic direction. When he's Clark Kent, you always portray him with the glasses on, and maybe they were just thinking glasses off, squinty eyes.
I don't know. I thought Lois, who had eyes the entire show, had a kind of a creepy face. So maybe they were trying to get away from the creepy doll look. Go for
Yeah,
Mr. Magoo instead.
I wouldn't be surprised if that was just the Superman art style, the squinty look.
That's possible too. That's definitely
Or,
possible.
or even just going with eyebrows and pupils. That's a pretty common choice in the comics, and
Yeah.
they may have done that a lot in the guidance of the show.
I really like the art. It's very simplistic with the character models, which I appreciate as an old comic style. But then you get these real elaborate backgrounds. They get a little less excuse me, a little less quality as they go on, but like they just look like real elaborate paintings almost.
Oh yeah, I love that. Excellent use of shadows. How they'll do silhouettes when it looks good, and when they'll oftentimes whenever Superman changes into his, I guess it's underneath his reporter clothes, but they'll usually do some kind of silhouette shadow effect with that.
Saves time on animation too.
Yeah, and what do you think about the S on his chest? Did they invent that particular black with the gold trim and the red S? I don't know if that was comic book accurate.
His S was pretty simplistic when it first started.
But even then, I didn't think they used the black in the comics, but they do it here, and it's a different look, but it really works well for these episodes in the color palette they're doing.
No, I agree. It works for sure.
The yellow trim looks good, and I think they kept that consistent through all the episodes. But we should talk about the specific episodes. I mean, we've talked about controversial content, but some people say this is the origin of the Godzilla archetype for the ice creature, the Arctic giant.
Oh, I wrote Godzilla's episode 4. Godzilla raids again. So, one other thing I want to say about before we get to the episodes is I really love in the first couple how you see the flashes in the barrel of the guns for the individual gunshots. Love it. Love it, love it, love it.
Yeah.
And then
good.
2, regarding the intro, I don't understand why they ruined it for the second season.
There's 3 intros, I think.
Well, there is. There's actually, I think there's 4 technically. So the first one had his origin story, and they used that a few times in the last set of episodes.
Okay, yeah.
And you included in that is Superman was raised in an orphanage. And was that ever canon?
Yeah, that was comic book canon right there.
Okay. All right.
I don't know how he got the name Kent, because he wasn't raised on a farm. He grew up in an orphanage, man, and then he just goes to the big city. I don't know when DC decided we're going to change that around, but
Okay. And then it was deemed in the intro faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, able to leap tall buildings in a single bound, which you would be able to see that later. I mean, it kind of kept with the George Reeves show.
So that last part was the first thing they changed, leaping the tall buildings. And I forget what episode it was, but they changed that briefly to able to soar faster than any plane or something like that.
Yeah, so it was the last 2 episodes of what I call the first season, the Fleischers, able to soar higher than any plane.
Yeah.
And then when they got to the famous studios, other than the origin ones they used,
right,
it was faster than a streak of lightning, more powerful than the pounding surf.
Yeah, man, the surf.
Mightier than a roaring hurricane.
He's like Aquaman, man. Or
it's
Godzilla.
Like, why would you change that?
Well, it was a Pacific campaign. It ties into what they were going for.
A water-based man?
Yes. Ugh. He's crossing the Pacific to bring the I always thought at least some of these intros said he was fighting for truth, justice, and the American way, but none of these have that in that. No.
That was added for the show, but yeah, I'm possibly the radio. I'm not sure about that. Anyways, back to the episodes. Yeah, so the other thing I noticed especially in the first part, was this is a very feminist Lois. She flies planes, she fires machine guns in the first 3 episodes.
They never get into her backstory, but you just assume she's the son he never had of an army dad, right? Whatever his name is.
General
she could
be in the Olympics. I mean,
No,
She's
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 very agile. The way she,
she's
leaps.
walking high wires and heels.
Yeah, and stockings and all that. She's I mean, the only reason you can talk about she's always getting captured and kidnapped and all that, but it's because she's doing stuff nobody else is willing to do, and she doesn't have superpowers. I mean, who else? Who else would be able to pull this off?
Well, she's no Batman.
Well, no. It would have been great to see a Batman cartoon from the same studio. If things hadn't gone south, you kind of wonder, could they have done
Yeah.
Batman at one point?
No, that's true. But no, she's like this incredible athlete who could do amazing things like fire machine guns and fly jets, but she has no common sense in this show at all.
Yeah, I mean, she's getting the story. She's got to get in there and get it, and she wants to beat Clark Kent out of the byline.
Which she did in all but one episode.
A really fun dynamic between the two because they're not lovers. They're partners, but they're rivals. Like, they always go on the same assignments, but one of them gets to do the byline somehow.
Well, she always gets the byline other than when she burned her hands.
That was funny. The Mummy.
That was funny.
The Mummy
Yeah.
episode.
All right, so
Mummy Strikes.
back to specific episodes. Superman, the Mad Scientist. It's the classic of the classic. Most people, if they've ever seen one of these episodes, it's going to be that one, if you have to pick one. And it's got the amazing scene where he's punching the ray back into the gun, something they should have implemented in the 1990 Fantastic Four movie. Could have been the closing scene instead of this.
There's one other episode where Lois doesn't get the byline. I think it's in the first 5, but there's a joke in there about she's complaining how Clark got the story, and he says, well, Lois, maybe I'm just Superman. And I forget which one it was, but it's in there.
But yeah, we have the mechanical monsters, that's fun. You said you remember that as one of the top famous ones. What's your favorite part of that?
I think it inspired the second issue of the Ninja Turtles comic when Baxter Stockman created the Mousers to break into banks and eat the jewels and the treasures and the jewelry shops and all that, and then just kind of dump them out of their compartment when they got back to the lab. So it's fun to watch Superman fight the machines, and really the machine design is really great. I think that was influential in its own right with just those. They're tall and very mechanical, but they have these really lanky, noodly arms. And that probably influenced Magnus Robot Fighter, a different comic idea. There's a little bit of inconsistency in the animation as to whether we're supposed to be following robot number 5 or number 13. And that's a bit of an odd thing, but that's an episode where Superman uses X-ray vision too, right? When Lois Lane sneaks inside of one of the compartments.
That's probably where I remember using the vision. Which for whatever reason, they just didn't really revisit that. Maybe one other episode.
You assume he has it, but they just don't show it on screen because I guess it's more complicated to do that kind of layered animation over something.
So $1 Billion Limited was a fun episode, but it was not memorable necessarily.
The train, big old train now.
I watched it, and then the next morning, I'm like, I watched 3 episodes, and I can't remember what the third one was about.
I don't think Superman handled that whole train situation terribly well logistically, but it's fun anytime you got a moving train. I'm a sucker for that in animation.
Then we had the Arctic Giant with Godzilla.
Gojira.
Where he gets melted out of ice, a la Raids Again.
Does Superman kill him? What does he do in the end?
I think he ties him up.
Really? Doesn't refreeze him? Huh.
I think they show him in like a zoo pit or something.
That's weird.
But this is the episode where I made the note, skipping Superman across the towns is quite silly looking. And I hadn't read this stuff online to see he couldn't fly yet.
Yeah, I didn't mind that, but I don't think they ever did anything quite like that again. They were flying very soon afterward.
And then we had the Bulleteers, which was...
the fast cars with the mobsters?
Yeah, that bust through buildings.
Yeah, that was kind of... I don't know. It's a little bit more of the forgettable one for me.
Not everything can be a home run.
The magnetic telescope is weird because...
the police cause their own problem.
Yeah, I don't understand the argument. So if the police are confronting the scientist about his invention, why don't they just do something about it? But they don't, they don't open fire.
Until he starts his experiment and then takes out the instrument that can fix it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in this one, for people, this is where a scientist is able to pull meteors and things like that out of the sky down to Earth that can also repel them.
And it's not really resolved. The scientist kind of just leaves at one point, doesn't he?
Well, he runs away before he gets smashed. I think that's his real goal.
That's it, though. Oh.
Because he can't fix the machine. Superman ends up kind of using his body as a conduit.
That episode feels like a lesser version of the Mad Scientist.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And I don't know what it is. Are we assuming that Metropolis is New York City. Manhattan gets a specific reference in Electric Earthquake, but what's your take on what this city is? Is it ever called Metropolis in this?
That's a good question. In DC lore, obviously, Metropolis is New York City. I don't know, kind of like his origin story of growing up on the farm. I'm not sure when Metropolis gets named in the comics.
It's just a great metropolitan city or a great metropolitan newspaper.
Yeah, let's see.
But it just whatever big city they're in, there's this giant mountain fairly close to it, and all these mad scientists seemingly build their laboratories on top of the giant cliff mountain.
Yeah. Metropolis first appearance was in Action Comics 16 in 1939. So yeah, it's been around for a couple of years. So it should be Metropolis, whether they call it that or not.
It's just weird because all these scientists seem to be using the same laboratory whenever they're up on a high place, so they can fire something down or have a telescope they can pull something in.
Yeah. Now, in Electric Earthquake, I think the premise of the episode is kind of absurd. You have a rich Native American telling the Daily Planet to run a story saying that the city should give the land back to him, the Native Americans, and his way of forcing the issue is he's got an underground lab with wires that go up to different parts of the city underneath the water and cause earthquakes. Yeah.
So it's so he wants reparations for his people, but really just himself.
I guess. I don't know. Now, I like the visuals of when Superman gets fried and stuff. It's fun.
Yeah,
But
it's not that he's vulnerable. He might be impervious or immune to electricity, but it's not something he wants to. It's not a feeling he seems to enjoy when he has to go through a high-level electric shock.
no, I think he enjoys it about as much as we do when we touch a doorknob and it fries us. It's like,
Yeah,
he can do it, but doesn't want to.
has to just power through it.
Then Volcano was another kind of kind of episode to me. He kind of got lucky in saving the village.
Yeah, he throws a big rock at one point, doesn't he, to stop?
Well, yeah, they had this plan, which he's not around to hear, where they're going to use some dynamite to save the city from the volcano. And then he ends up having the dynamite and he just has to chunk it so it doesn't blow up. And it just happens to divert stuff in the way it needs to. So yeah, it's like,
He's super lucky, man.
Yeah. And then Terror on the Midway, that's the King Kong episode where
Great.
Lois plays the Lois Fay Ray.
I don't understand why everything falls apart at the circus so quickly.
And why can a gorilla take out Superman?
Well, that's the whole 100 men versus a gorilla argument. Is Superman the strength of 100 men in this? So, and that's a bigger gorilla than normal, so he's got a better chance against 100 men.
But that was a fun episode. Definitely had King Kong vibes, which actually, I guess, would have come out before the episode. So maybe they get inspired by that.
And not just that, but all the other animal circus creatures, lions and I guess elephants, who knows what else in there. It just all falls apart so surprisingly. And it's also one of the episodes when I see the title, I long misremember it as being a World War II episode because of the Battle of Midway. But no, it's the Midway and how people used to use it before we had video games by Midway, pinball machines. Just the entertainment strip when the circus comes to town.
Yeah. And then that's the end of the season 1. You could call it Fleischer Studios, and we get the famous studios. And I believe is the Mummy Strikes the only non-wartime episode? No, the Underground World.
Yeah, the Underground
with
people.
Hawkmen. Yeah, with the Hawkmen. So there's 2. And those honestly, the Mummy Strikes the Underground World are probably my other 2 favorite ones for the season.
So Destruction Incorporated or Destruction Inc., it is tied into the war effort, but I think it's only consequentially because there's a weapons manufacturer, and I guess some mobsters or something are working for the Nazis. A little bit confusing how that's set up.
It feels a little unclear because they seem American, but they're obviously trying to hurt the American war efforts too.
Yeah, it's clear why the weapons are being made, but other than that, it's really not war propaganda.
There was also a character in this season, I think he appeared 2 episodes, that's almost like a creepy mini version of Jimmy Olsen.
Louis or something like that? Lewis?
I think his name's Lewis, but I think there's 2 characters actually that just really look alike, because in one of them's that outside scene where I don't think he's tied to the planet, and then one is in their office. He shows up and tells them that they have to go to the opera.
It's a formal. He grabs his bow tie.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, is there a gangster boss that appears in multiple episodes who just doesn't get named? There's some
I
similar
don't think so.
designs they recycle.
Yeah, I think they got recycled designs, but I don't think there's any recurring characters in this whole show other than Superman and Lois and Perry White.
The the showdown also has one of my favorite shots. It's where Superman takes the imposter back to the gangster's hideout, and Superman just walks up silently to the gangster's desk, and he's the boss is berating him, and it just shows his chest. And I think there's another one too. It's similar when the fake Superman's on the roof. He takes a bunch of shots out of his pistol, and they just bounce off, and then he throws the gun at Superman, which I think the George Reeves show did a whole lot. They they empty the clip and throw the gun at him.
Yeah, which would make sense. I mean, what else would you could do with your empty gun?
Use it as a club in case he comes close. But those are great shots. Just how he silently stands there, very Batman-like. I think the Batman animated series probably took inspiration from that episode on at least one occasion. Maybe the man who killed Batman. When Batman goes to Rupert Sorin's office, there's some similarities in the showdown in that one.
Yeah. The Mummy Strikes. That was a fun episode.
Yeah, very old school.
This is a movie right here in 6 minutes. Yeah, so the scientist is dead and he's found by a mummy coffin. His assistant is charged and found guilty. Then someone from the museum has found evidence which may free the lady. They realize that there was a tablet that talked about the curse of King Tush, which was the mummy. And the scientists have been trying to bring mummies back to life. Then it said somehow it failed, like if it was supposed to work. And then they realized that when he attempted to open the coffin, he got a poisonous needle injected in him. And Clark Kent and Lois are both in the place at this point. The tomb opens, and his loyal guardians wake up. They're giants, like 10 feet tall or whatever. And they chase around Superman and Lois and all that good stuff. It's a fun little 6 minutes. Obviously, quick pace to get all that in 6 minutes.
In my opinion, it may be the one that could have been most interesting as a longer length episode. If you're going to pick a few to really stretch out, that could have been it.
That one in the underground world.
Yeah.
Definitely for season 2. I mean, I think the Arctic Giant could have been fun as a Godzilla cartoon with Superman.
Right.
And then this is the episode where Lois almost gets thrown into a fire, but her hands apparently get burnt, and Clark gets the story. I guess it's the first supernatural episode too. You have fantasy in the first season, but nothing really supernatural. This is more of a supernatural bent.
Probably.
Then you got Jungle Drums, which we talked about before. Very awkward show. We do get a mad Hitler at the end. That's noteworthy. And then you have, which it's in some ways it's my favorite, just because it's so dark. You have the underground world.
Yeah. It's like the Mole Men, but done with a better budget.
Yeah. And you get this guy whose father did expeditions, and he's found these charts to the Henderson Caverns, and he wants the Daily Planet to finance the expedition. So Lois and Clark go. Lois and the guy who I didn't write the name down takes a boat into the cavern.
Henderson, right? That's the family.
Okay, I wrote down it was named the Caverns. I didn't catch it. It was the name too.
Henderson's.
And they accidentally lose their boat after they unload it, and there's explosives still on it. The explosives eventually go towards the waterfall area, and there's an explosion. Clark's on his way to another boat, but doesn't know what's going on yet. And then they get captured in this underground world of Hawkmen.
Yeah, it's terrific.
Don't think there's any Hawk women.
You would never think the Hawkmen would live underground, but hey,
Yeah.
There you go. It's irony.
And I should say Henderson's father is missing forever, like the last 50 years or whatever. And they see the statue of his father above, like the Chief Birdman.
My assumption is they worshipped his image, but nope, that's not.
Nope. So Lois and Henderson get put on this platform, which gets brought up, and they're about to be dipped into hot yellow liquid.
Bronzing.
So you can read between the lines, and his father got Han Solo'd.
There seems to be a moment of realization they have during that, too. I don't know if the camera cuts directly back to the statue, but yeah, it's pretty well done in its subtlety.
Yeah, no dialogue, so they can get away with it. I don't know if that would have been allowed if they acknowledged it.
Works for me, man. It's good.
Yeah. And then Clark eventually gets there. Superman comes out. They have a little fight. Superman saves him, and then they block the hole with the dynamite that was in Clark's boat. And then Lois writes the story, and you see the cigarettes, and the chief burns it. Says, "That's a great story, Lois." No one would believe it.
It's probably the most prominent use of cigarettes in the series, even though a lot of the gangsters smoke. I'm assuming it's Perry White. They just call him Chief in most episodes, or maybe Mr. White. But you get to see his full ashtray, and then he lights the whole script, the whole story on fire. I mean, he paid for that expedition. Why would he not hold on to it just to, I don't know, send it into a science fiction magazine or something? Like, promote it as a creative story inspired by world travels, something like that. I don't know. Go figure.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody can believe Superman, right? Why not a race of Hawkmen underground?
Well, the other problem too is if they did believe it, people would go back and try to find them again.
Maybe that's what he was doing.
Yeah.
He just didn't want to say it. Fascinating.
Yeah. And then the final episode, Secret Agent.
No Lois. No Lois in that episode. I think it's the only one, right?
I think so. They have a Lois substitute.
Indeed. The blonde version.
And interesting enough, to basically be ending a war or one's efforts in a war, it could not have been a less interesting episode. You would think that would be inherently interesting.
We do get a nice final shot of Superman flying away with the 48-star American flag as the final shot.
Oh no, that was nice. That was nice. He saluted it as well. But basically, this lady is on the run. She's got a list of all the saboteurs in the country and a list of their names and their plans. And they're trying to escort her to Washington. The escort gets attacked. She gets caught on a swing bridge, almost gets squished. It's kind of a confusing scene more than anything, though.
Yeah.
Clark is at some point locked in a room. He escapes the Superman. He captures the bad guys in an elevator and then rescues the girl just in time and flies her to Washington and dumps her off on the steps. I'm not sure even with loose security back then that would have been sufficient to get her inside. But
And I will say, when he goes to Washington, it looks like he jumped the whole way. The way they animated that.
Yeah. So this does have the first and only time I think he's using a phone booth for real. It opens
Wait,
that.
in Secret Agent episode, he changes in the closet. What are we talking about?
No,
here?
he didn't change. He was using the phone booth. He was calling.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and Perry White's telling him not to make his own assignments. Like, he doesn't want him on the case. That's a very Batman animated series episode too. The way he jumps on the back of the old cars. And
Yeah.
That's something Batman would do, and also just kind of playing possum until he can learn enough of the gangster's plans to strike, so he doesn't have to give himself away too much. It's amazing how quickly some of these plots resolve, because you're at the dramatic climax with like 50 seconds left in the episode, and it just ends. Like, oh yeah, okay.
Well, it's like a modern movie trailer. It gives everything away, and it's over in 5 minutes.
And without there being any real supervillains, Superman really just has to punch the guys in a non-lethal way. It feels like he's politely punching them every time he does get into a fist fight.
Yeah. And one thing about these, and because they're all individual, there's no continuity going across the episodes. I would have loved to have seen 3 or 4-parter. I think there's multiple episodes that you could have done that and it would have worked.
Yeah. Movie serials, you never know if they're going to show up for the next movie, though. So that's understandable. But it would have been nice if there was just a deluxe version of it. Something just a little bit longer than normal. Maybe a little bit more ambitious of a plot. But that's what we got. And maybe if the Fleischers hadn't had a spat, we could have had that.
Possibly. All right. What are we going to rank this off of? Or rate this off?
We could say mechanical monsters. Lois Lane high heel shoes. That's kind of awkward. Those weird close-ups of Superman's eyeballs. How about
Squinty eyes.
Squinty eyes. Yeah, so that's appropriate for this show. I'm giving it 5 out of 5 squinty eyes. I don't, for whatever cultural baggage you might want to say, for whatever the format holds it back due to the limited runtime, it just defines everything that Superman should be 3 years into his existence. And even with all the dated references, it just, for me, is one of the things I think of first when Superman comes into my mind. Some of those particular shots that I mentioned.
Yeah, so I'm going to give it 4.5 squinty eyes. George Reeves gets 5 by default. And
okay.
I still think he's the definitive Superman, so I can't put this above that. I'm not going to downgrade it for the cultural stuff. I mean, it's 60, 70, I guess it's 80 years after the fact now. A few of the episodes were just kind of duds. So
sure,
if all of them were not necessarily home runs, but at least good, I would have probably gone with 5 anyways, or 4.75.
I'd say they're all at least good. They're all at least worth watching once and just appreciating something about it, if you don't care for the whole of it.
Destruction Inc. was pretty lame.
I think some of the other ones were worse than Destruction Inc. I mean,
that's my point.
Hey, it's all right though.
Yeah. All right. Well, that has been the Fleischer Studios Superman cartoons. You can get a DVD or a Blu-ray for for sure less than $20, but you can just get them off YouTube as well. They are public domain. But everyone should check them out. Like I said, this is the kind of thing. I was watching the NASCAR race the other day, and I would get caught up on the race, and then I would just watch a couple of these cartoons, and then I would go get caught up on the race again, fast forwarding through commercials. Like, you can work through these very quickly. Now, I don't recommend watching all 17 in a row. Your head will start hurting.
Sure.
But over 2 or 3 day period, check them out. Take you a couple hours. Yep.
No doubt.
All right.
Up, and away.
Up, and away. Bye-bye.
I'm heading out.